So, I've done a video on strategy and tactics and how that theory can be used to plan hands based on the table dynamic, but I did not discuss the actual process itself. In this video, my goal is to give you some direction on how to hone in on a hand planning process that can be used on every single street you play. Once implemented, the overall quality of every play that we make should be improved. Also, as a bonus, once you start using a deliberate decision-making process, you will find that it becomes virtually impossible to autopilot and make hasty or emotional subpar decisions. My hope is that this video will go a long way toward eliminating a lot of factors that atrophy our win rate when we play in an unorganized fashion. In other words, once you implement this process or a similar process, the quality of all of your actions will then only be limited by your strategic and tactical skill. Every winning poker player makes decisions based on the information at hand. How they go about processing the information varies from person to person. Often, exact methodologies may be inconsistent from session to session or even hand to hand. While quality decisions may be arrived at with a fairly great frequency, without a systematic and precise process, optimal performance is difficult to achieve. Think of golf or a bowling routine. There's a reason players do this. It's to reset their mind and focus at the beginning of every action in order to make sure that they are staying true to the fundamentals and building muscle memory and optimizing everything that they do. I, for one, am guilty of this from time to time. Sometimes I'm lazy, tired, or even both, and find it hard to focus and have definitive structure in my decision-making process. This leads to autopiloting, which, of course, is detrimental to anyone's win rate. After years of falling into ruts more than I care to admit, I decided to invent my own systematic way of thinking through hands that consistently has me thinking of the correct things in the most efficient way possible. I call the process the DPS method. Not damage per second, as in a lot of games, but dynamic, plan, and sizing. It's similar to the REM process, which was range, equity, and maximize, that you can read about in the book Professional No Limit Hold'em. And while I feel that the REM process was groundbreaking at the time, I think it's a little bit difficult for average players to implement it. Thus, I came up with this DPS process. The major difference is that my process forces you to assess the table dynamic before forming a plan. The plan can include deciphering the ranges and equities, but some situations don't require you to go that deep. Some do. My process allows you to always factor in the other players into your decision-making process, which alone will make a huge difference in anyone's play. Once you have the fundamentals down, adjusting to your table is what 90% of your focus should be on. The end game is all about being able to be one step ahead of your opponents. And becoming both technically good and mastering reading situations will make you one dangerous beast of a poker player. Now let's talk about the process in detail. First, we have the dynamic, which is the D part of the DPS. And this includes basically all the current factors and all the reads that you have on all of the opponents, both recent and in the past. Now, this is a very complicated part of the game, and I'm not going to go into details. I'm just going to point out that this is the time in your hand playing process that you should be looking around the table, thinking about hands you've played with the players of the table, thinking about the player types that you're playing against, before you move on to the planning process of the DPS method. And that takes us to the P part, which is, like I just said, plan. And this is basically just formulating what you're going to do in the hand and figuring out the best tactics to attack your opponents based on the dynamic. And lastly, we have sizing. Now, you're not going to be betting every single time that you play a hand or play a street. So if you were just calling or checking, then you don't even need to do this step. You can just do step 1 and step 2, dynamic and planning. But if you are going to bet or raise, this is when you use the sizing part. And basically what that means is just whatever the most appropriate bet size or raise size is that carries out the plan that you've already formulated in step 2. The beauty of this process is that it works with any action and on any street. It also allows you to account for all contingencies, new information, anything that might arise through an entire hand or series of hands. But maybe the best part of it is not just staying focused and using consistency in your hands, but it also is the ultimate weapon to combat complacency or even autopiloting. If you find that you are timing out on tables while using this process, you're probably playing too many tables. You need to back off, make sure you can plan through your hands, and have sufficient time to do so. Now that you have the process to keep your thoughts on track, you can focus on forming strategy and tactics to attack every different dynamic you might face. Hopefully, the game just got a whole lot easier and maybe even a little more interesting. Enjoy.